Today I'm going to present dynamic college admissions and the determinants of students' college retention. This joint work with Ignacio Rios at UT Dallas. We know higher education is both valuable and scarce resource, but it also exhibits very low yield, measured by low retention and on-time graduation rates. Indeed, according to the OECD, only 40% of full-time bachelor students graduate by the theoretical duration of their programs. This is heavily affected by the fact that many students switch their majors or colleges, and many more drop out without ever graduating. At the same time, several countries organize their college admissions via centralized assignment mechanisms, currently more than 46 countries in the world. So this raises the following research question. Can centralized assignment mechanisms affect students' outcomes, such as their decisions to drop out and switch majors or colleges? And if they do so, how should we design matching markets in order to improve agents' outcomes in this type of settings? Although this is an important question, there is actually scarce evidence about the potential effect of market design on outcomes. And there is a particular reason for this. We really need to understand carefully the determinants of students' dynamic decisions, their switchings or dropout choices, and how they might be connected or affected by the design of the market and the admission system. In this paper, we will conjecture the existence of two behavioral channels that are predominantly affecting these decisions. First, students might be switching or dropping out because maybe they are learning over time about their match qualities through their experience. Upon receiving new information, this could, for instance, affect their future labor market returns. That's why they switch or drop out to avoid exposed mismatches. But it's also possible that even in the absence of learning, students can still be switching or dropping out because the assignment mechanism is generating initial mismatches. Let me define this in this setting. If students have dynamic considerations, knowing that they can reapply in the future, retake exams, and they face some uncertainty on their admission chances, the following can happen. Students who are initially not assigned to their top choices can still face incentives to enroll into those programs in order to improve their outset option, and then retake exams, reapply, and switch to initially more preferred programs, that is switching up in their initial preferences. The problem is that if the system is in excess demand, and colleges care about retention, which they do, this behavior generates a congestion externality. Therefore, it might be ex ante inefficient to assign some students with low retention probability not to their top choices due to this congestion externality. Now, there might be also distributional considerations of this congestion externality because low-income students might be disproportionately harmed due to facing higher switching costs. So the big picture of this project is how should we correctly balance the gains from learning through experimentation with this congestion externality produced by initial mismatches when we want to redesign a matching market like college admissions. And we will do so by first building a dynamic structural model of students' college progression in the presence of a centralized admission system. We model students applying to the centralized system, retaking exam, reapplying, switching, and dropping out, while they learn over time about their match qualities through their college grades. With the model and the data, we're going to disentangle both behavioral channels, and then we're going to evaluate policies that aim to reduce the congestion externality produced by initial mismatches by eliciting the intensity on students' preferences. And we do this in two ways, either by changing the assignment mechanism or by incorporating reapplication rules, playing with dynamic incentives that students face while in college. The trade-offs we face in the first case, we might generate strategic incentives. And in the second case, we might generate exposed mismatches if we want to reduce initial mismatches by increasing switching costs. Our main results is that there is actually a significant share of switches that might be inefficient. We can reduce switches by close to 35% that are due to initial mismatches. And simple policies such as allowing students to signal a unique choice in their rank order list and receiving a score bonus for it, similarly in the spirit to the signaling mechanism of the econ job market, can actually eliminate 17% of switchings while achieving the same level of welfare. Welfare gains accrue mainly to low-income students, and welfare losses accrue to high-income students. So it also improves in terms of equity. The main contribution of the paper in a big picture is that we are analyzing the trade-offs of designing matching markets where there are dynamic considerations, reapplications, switchings, retaking exams, learning over time about their match qualities through experience, and all of these considerations can actually affect and map into real outcomes. Let me go over the system that we're going to exploit. We're going to look at the Chilean centralized system. In Chile, students apply directly to programs, which are combinations of majors and universities, which is the most common college structure in the world. Students every year can take a set of national exams called the PSU, and once they observe their scores, they can submit rank order lists with no more than 10 programs in them. We look at Chile primarily for two reasons. First, Chile uses a variant of the most common assignment mechanism in the world, the different acceptance algorithm. So if we learn about Chile, we learn about many other countries. And second, there are interesting dynamics. Students in Chile can retake the PSU and reapply to the centralized system every year. When they do so, they tend to restart their education, delaying their graduation. Close to 30% of students are going to switch programs and close to 30% drop out, which maps to the lowest on-time graduation rate among OECD countries. Also, importantly, low-income students are almost twice as likely to drop out and half as likely to switch. So there might be distributional consequences of reducing this congestion externality. The data that we explore is first data coming from the admission process, enrollment data in the higher education system, and a new and novel grade records data for students enrolling in the centralized system while in college. We're also going to complement this with aggregate information on labor market prospects, such as average wages, and to handle the fact that students might be reporting their preferences strategically in the baseline, we're going to design and conduct and implement two nationwide surveys where we will elicit information about students' top true preferences for programs, subjective beliefs about their admission chances, and even about their college progression. We're going to exploit this data to show that the both behavioral channels are at play, but also to construct moments that will be key to identify some parameters in the structural model. Let me give you just a big picture of the model. This is going to be a dynamic discrete choice model of students' college progression. Students are going to be submitting rank order list when they apply to a centralized system. Students will be forward-looking, and they will have an observed heterogeneity, persistent idiosyncratic preferences at the major and college level, which will capture the unobserved portion of the preference intensity that triggers the initial mismatching channel. But we will also allow students to learn over time about their known match qualities with programs. And we label them as multidimensional abilities at the subject and major level to give them a productive meaning. Why? Because both preferences and abilities are going to affect students' achievement. So students are going to learn about their known match qualities through their college grades, and this might affect their future labor market returns. Students will update their beliefs in a Bayesian fashion, and they will have a common prior. Let me give you now what is the key challenge here. How can we separately identify the switches and dropouts accruing to learning versus initial mismatching? In the model, learning is particularly captured by the parameters in the distribution of the signal, that is students' college grades, and the parameters in their prior beliefs about unknown match qualities or unknown abilities. Intuitively, the variation that helps us to identify these parameters is a correlation between college grade and student outcomes, such as switchings and dropouts, but also that we observe a panel of repeated respondents in the surveys, and we get variation in students' top true preferences. Intuitively, if the learning channel is strong, we should observe that students who receive lower grades than expected are significantly more likely to switch to programs that were not initially listed in their application list, switching out. For the initial mismatching channel, the main parameters that capture this are the idiosyncratic and persistent preferences at the major and college level. Here we exploit the fact that students tend to rank several programs in their list, and we look at the correlation patterns within initial preferences before they have learned anything about their match qualities through their grades. And also that there is some variation, exogenous variation in the preference of assignment of students, and we see how this correlates with switching outcomes. For instance, if the initial mismatching channel is relatively strong, we should observe that students who are barely not assigned to their top choices need to be significantly more likely to reapply and switch to initially more preferred programs, regardless of their college grades. And this is exactly what we see. So the variations in the data show the following. If we exploit the discontinuities created by admission cutoffs, we can estimate the causal effect of not being assigned to your top preference on several outcomes. Here I'm showing you these causal effects on the probability of reapplying to the centralized system or switching. What we observe is that close to 50% of these switches are to more selective programs, and between 25 and 50% move up in their initial preferences, consistent with the initial mismatching channel. We're going to exploit all of these variations and build moments for the estimation of the structural model. For the learning channel, we look at the repeated respondents in the surveys, and we see that 60% of reapplicants declared to have changed their top true preference for program. Quite a lot of preference variation over time. But also we're going to look at the correlation patterns between college grades and student outcomes. We see that the probability of switching up is uncorrelated with college grades. But when we look at students who receive lower grades than expected and switch, they are typically switching out. That is, switching to programs that were not initially listed, typically changing their major or their college or their subject type, which is consistent with the learning channel. So both channels are at play. Let me now explain you what are going to be the counterfactors that we will evaluate. We're going to evaluate four counterfactors, two types: changing the assignment mechanism, further constraining the length of application lists, or allowing students to signal only one program in their application list and receiving a score bonus for it. Again, similar in spirit to the signaling mechanism of the econ job market. Both mechanisms introduce an opportunity cost on which program to include in the list or which program to signal, which in equilibrium will elicit preference intensity and will increase the probability of getting more students assigned to their top two choices. This should reduce the congestion externality of initial mismatches and improve outcomes, hopefully not at the expense of students' welfare. But we will also evaluate a different way to elicit intensity. That is, by playing with students' dynamic incentives. We're going to incorporate reapplication rules. In Turkey, for instance, when students try to switch programs, they are going to be penalized in their application score. And in Finland, when students apply, they receive a score bonus, but only the first time they apply to college. In both cases, what we're going to do, dynamically, we're going to incentivize students to do not enroll into initial mismatches. Okay, trying to partially price the congestion externality of the initial mismatches. We're going to look at these counterfactuals in two metrics: students' welfare and also college retention. That is just what is the reduction in switchings and dropouts in every program. What we see here is that both the signaling mechanism and the first-time applicant score bonus can increase retention and welfare. And this is particularly true for low-income students. We evaluate two extremes, either assuming that in the counterfactual, all students will behave strategically, the left panel, or assuming that students are going to behave as naive as what we find in the baseline model. That is, 10% will keep behaving as naive truth tellers. Sadly, the most common policy that is used in the world to elicit preference intensity, that is further constraining the length of application lists, seems to be not very effective at increasing college retention rates. And if students are not fully sophisticated, it can be particularly dire for their welfare. So let me now conclude. The big takeaways of this project is that we have analyzed the trade-off of designing matching markets, where agents can have private information about their preferences, learn over time about their match qualities through their experience, and also face dynamic considerations, such as knowing when to apply, reapply, switch, or drop out. These insights are going to map to many other markets that face similar features, like, for instance, entry-level labor markets. The key insight is that we have to correctly balance the gains from learning through experimentation with the congestion externality produced by initial mismatches. But we have also shown, for the case of college admission systems, that redesigning centralized systems can improve student outcomes and even reduce inequality, if we do so in the correct manner, either by allowing students to signal their intensity, the intensity on their preferences through the mechanism, or by leveraging dynamic incentives that obtain this information. Sadly, lack of sophistication seems to reduce both efficiency, equity, and also welfare gains, so we need to aid students in their optimal application list, which is a current work in progress that we have with Ignacio and some other co-authors. So I think I'm on time. Thank you very much.
Okay, so there's there was a question about to what extent you could use this kind of model to think about college admissions in where there's no majoring, like where there's no specialization, where you can move around. So I think Ignacio also answered it a little bit, but if you wanna.
Yeah, so I am not aware actually of centralized systems. Typically, the centralized systems are implemented in countries where the college structure is at the program level. We could think, of course, of centralized systems that are at the college level and then choosing a major. But yeah, in the end, the same trade-offs are going to play in the sense of preference intensity. But now it would be more regarding your preferences with the college. What we have seen in the case of Chile is that most of the learning comes with respect to your match quality with the major and not the college type. So you should expect less of an effect in those type of settings.
So there's Andre who asks whether the constraint mechanism that you're proposing, whether that's or the signaling, whether there's truthful, whether it's truthful.
This is a very good question. So if we compare all the mechanisms relative to the baseline, that is already not strategy proof if the constraint in the length of the list is binding. For the case of Chile, the constraint in the length of the list is binding to for less than 10% of students in terms of their application lists. So it's not a big concern, but still students behave strategically because they tend to skip programs that they believe are out of their reach, which is a different issue. The signaling mechanism, what is nice about it, is that you can implement it even if you don't have constraint deferred acceptance. You can have deferred acceptance without any constraint, which imposes no incentives to misreport the order of preferences. And the signal is going to introduce strategic incentives, but only regarding which program you signal. This is evaluated in detail in the paper of Yasuda, Che, and Abdul Kadiroglu. So it has nice properties regarding not introducing too high strategic incentives, but still eliciting preference intensity.
And then I will take the opportunity. So when you do the counterfactual and you simulate the strategic, how do you simulate? There's very many equilibria, no?
Yeah, so we solve for the equilibrium. What we do, although there might be multiplicity of equilibria, we assume adaptive beliefs for the counterfactual, and we follow a sequence of adaptive beliefs of cutoff scores for which we reach a unique equilibrium. This is a similar approach than Kapor et al. AER for the New Haven mechanism, but in our case, it's a bit more complicated because we have a dynamic model and we have a mixture of applicants and repeated applicants. So we do basically an equilibrium selection, but that makes some sense because it's following a sequence of adaptive beliefs.